for joining. It's really great to be here. And as Hillary mentioned, I've been in solar for a long time. My background is that of a developer. So I started doing that about 2008. And so the perspective I bring to this is from a developer standpoint. And hopefully this will help you as a customer, potential consumer of solar and renewables to have a better perspective on what to look for. And our agenda here is pretty brief. We've got about 20 minutes today, and we'll take some questions. An intro, a why solar for your business, case study, some key takeaways, and question and answer. And really the goal here today is to just give you a quick rundown and overview, an intro into solar, how it works, some of the considerations, and most importantly, to kind of arm you as the consumer with some questions to ask to be a little bit more sophisticated in your approach as you think through if solar and renewables are right for you. And I would encourage everybody, I know we're on sort of a one-way communication here, but if you have questions as they come up, please, by all means, type them in. Hillary will share them. And, the more collaborative we can make this, the better. So don't hesitate. But next slide, please, Hillary. All right, so what webinar I would be remiss if I didn't start with plugging our company a little bit, but I'll just very briefly share a little bit about us. We're USource Energy Advisors. We're part of NextEra Energy, which is a Fortune 200 company, and actually is the largest producer of wind and solar energy in the United States, and one of the largest asset owners and developers in the world. So we do have a lot of expertise and resources which we can bring to bear and help our customers. We serve approximately 3,000 clients in 24 different states, and we manage a lot of energy, both electricity and gas. Next slide, please. We offer a whole suite of advisory services, renewable energy, planning, demand management, energy efficiency, and other analysis and risk management. And I do think here on this slide too, you can see this is a representation of what your business or municipality can do with solar and other renewables. And this really is, I think, part of the takeaway. In addition to being sound business and doing the right thing, being green, et cetera, there's economic advantage in most cases to undertaking some sort of solar, renewable, or other energy project. And you can see this here represents, your baseline today, how things look after solar, after energy efficiency, and after other measures, demand response, and other things. And I think we'll see, and this has been seen in the industry, that economic savings are indeed attainable and actually quite necessary as you think about a renewable project. All right, so let's get to it. Next slide, please. So really, why solar for your business? There are a lot of different reasons, and I think generally speaking, solar is a safe, it's clean, it's reliable, and it's a very well understood technology. It's sort of become table stakes for businesses and municipalities as you think about how to manage operational plans, et cetera. And there's some really interesting studies that have been coming out as of late, talking about why sustainability, ESG, environment sustainability, governance, is such a good thing for business. And there's a BlackRock study that says 88% of their indices, which include ESG companies, outperform their non-ESG peers. And there's another study from Morgan Stanley that 85% of investors prefer investing in companies that have ESG and sustainability goals. And so as you think about sustainability and renewable energy, it's really become table stakes. It's the price of admission. Secondly here, it's a safe, well understood, and reliable technology. Solar's been around for 50 years. It's on the space shuttle and satellites. It works. There's no moving parts, and there's very little maintenance required. And these projects, as we alluded to, can have very significant economic benefits, literally thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, depending on the size and the scope. And part of this savings has been driven by cost curves. And you can see over here on the right this this graph here, and the light blue line that is trending downwards significantly over time. That's the price of solar over time, and this is about a 10-year time horizon here. And when I started doing solar and developing projects in about 2008, solar was about $4 a watt for a panel. And we measure everything in watts. Today, it's about 40 cents a watt. So you've seen literally a 90% decline in the cost curve. And it's a little bit like Moore's law in technology, where the efficiency and the speed of a processor doubles every 18 months. The cost curve for solar has come down to a point really where we're approaching the lowest level we've seen, certainly, but kind of reaching a floor of where the prices can go. And furthermore to that, there's a lot of different ways to purchase or finance solar systems. So in the past, the financial markets were not really attuned to solar. They didn't quite understand it. And today, there are a lot more options. You can certainly buy the system. You can enjoy the tax benefits, or there are a lot of third-party owned ways that you can get into or obtain a system through power purchase agreements, leases, operating leases, et cetera. And we'll touch on some of those. Solar is also really good for long-term control over energy spend and budget predictability. So some of the people, interestingly enough, who enjoy solar the most, obviously you have your champions internally, but the CFO and the C-suite, they oftentimes will really get behind a project because solar and renewables can lock in the price of energy over long periods of time, and that can create budget certainty and predictability, which is a nice thing. And finally, again, this sort of goes back to the first point. It demonstrates your organization's commitment to sustainability. Solar is a very visible representation of your commitment to the environment, of doing the right thing, and being a forward, progressive thinker, which has lots of benefits for customers, clients, employees, and it really allows folks to engage with your business. So at the highest level, solar is very positive for your organization. Okay, next slide, please. So let's just talk about a quick case study of some work that we've done for one of our customers. And there are literally a lot of different case studies that we could talk about, and each one is very unique. I will also point out that solar and renewables vary from region to region. So solar, what a project looks like in New Jersey, is very different than what looks like in New York, or Pennsylvania, or Ohio, or California. And so as a kind of general theme of this talk, having somebody who understands the different markets and the economics is a very important piece to the puzzle. But this one here is an example of a New York facility. So this is a small private care facility in upstate New York. They've been interested for a long time, really about 6 years or so, in leveraging solar for their business. And over the course of 6 years, as I've mentioned, the cost has come down, the programs have changed, the incentives have changed, and this organization was actually quite confused by the different options. They had been approached by developers, multiple developers, very frequently, weekly, really, for things like on-site solar, off-site solar, community solar, potentially a sleeved option, all these different names and mechanisms by which you can obtain solar. And so they became a little bit confused. We were working with them as energy advisors on other topics, and they asked us about it. So we helped them to develop a strategy and a plan and an approach to thinking about how they might go solar. And so that's exactly what we did. We educated them and helped kind of decipher the different types of programs. We looked at the individual proposals that they had received from various vendors. And just a quick note about some of the developers and vendors. There's a diversity of folks who are out there. Some of them are really good. Most of them are trying to do the right thing. But because solar can be so nuanced and the programs can change, renewables in general, oftentimes there's bad information or misinformation. And having somebody help you understand the proposal, understand the assumptions, and most importantly, ask the right questions can be very helpful. And with this particular company, that's what we did. And ultimately, what we agreed upon and determined to be the best solution for them was a community solar option. So in New York State right now, community solar, which is solar that's developed off-site, but the energy can be used on your property for the benefit of your business through bill credits without actually constructing solar on site, is a good option for many. And that's what we did. So they participated in this program. We developed an RFP to manage the vendors, to standardize the offering and really look at what the options were. And the net result was about a 10-15% savings. We're still working on that on their utility bill. And again, they don't have to host a physical array on their property. And another benefit that came out during this process was that we're exploring another potential revenue stream for this customer, which would be exploring a land lease. So they actually have some property and they're potentially going to lease this land to another developer who will invest capital and build an array to power other businesses in the area. So not only are they benefiting from someone else's array, it's an immediate savings on their bill. They're also potentially going to enable solar to help other businesses around the state. And so this is just one example of how we can help, but more importantly, how you as an organization can think about solar, renewable options, and how do you actually go about entering into a contract and realizing the benefits. Okay. Next slide. So let's talk quickly about some of the things that you can and should consider as you think about a solar project. First, and I think this one is probably the most important, is solar can have a positive economic and marketing impact on your business. As I mentioned, I've been developing and selling solar prior to becoming an advisor for more than a decade, and I don't think I've ever sold a project that did not have a positive economic benefit that was significant and could be measured by the CFO. And oftentimes, you or whomever in your organization who is the solar champion, right, they get excited about a project, they want to understand how it works, but there is always a governance process. This will always go up through the CEO or the board or the city council. And the question they will ask is invariably, well, how does it benefit us economically? And the good news is that in most places, solar, renewables generally have a very strong economic component to it. And, we and whomever you work with can help and should help determine what that is. Along those lines, the second point here, understand your organization's finance goals and hurdles. Right, many times the people who undertake the project are the champions, they're excited about it. But again, to get it done, you have to go through this process. And there are different goals and hurdles in different organizations. Businesses, corporations oftentimes will have a very short-term goal. Can we save money today? What's the payback? Is it 2 years or shorter? Whereas a municipality might say things like, look, this is a 25-year warranted asset. We're going to be here for a long time. What are our savings over the term of the agreement or the lifetime of that equipment? And so we can start to craft a message around, well, over the course of the system's performance, you will save X dollars. And so there are various ways that we can help sell this internally, which often can be the biggest challenge. And here again, it mentions finances. And so taking into account things like your organization's credits, the cash on hand, how you want to finance a project become very important as well. Some organizations like municipalities don't have any tax liability or tax appetite, and a solar renewable project, there are significant tax benefits which you can take advantage of. So if that's the case, maybe you want to have what we call a third-party owned system, where somebody else owns and operates, maintains, insures the system. And that's a perfectly acceptable option. And as I alluded to previously, The financial markets have come around. They understand solar, renewables. They like solar and renewables, and there are a lot more financing options for you and your organization to think about. Solar and renewables can be nuanced and confusing. This is very true. I've been doing this for over a decade, and I'm still learning new things every day, from the technology and equipment to the construction process to things a little more esoteric like permitting and interconnection, and most importantly, regulation and legislation. And as an example of that, solar in Pennsylvania, which we're looking at a number of projects and helping customers there, right now there's some legislation that's going through that's impacting things like net metering, how the credits are accounted for. And so that can make it a little bit difficult, right? You don't want to undertake a project if you believe the long-term benefits or the market is not going to be there. And so we can help with all this, the nuance really of developing a solar project. And I often like to say too, you as somebody who's interested in thinking about solar, certainly you can become educated, but at the same time, you've got a day job. Your business is running a town, running a brewery, whatever it may be. You don't necessarily, you're not in the business of developing and vetting a power plant. And so oftentimes it's helpful to get some perspective and think about how you're going to manage that process. Understand the solar potential in your state or region. Again, very critical. There are certain places right now where if you, as an example, New Jersey. If you're in New Jersey, the solar markets there are mature, they're well understood, the incentives are robust, and you should absolutely be considering solar. New York State, very similar. There's a strong community solar program, and the prevailing cost of energy is very high there. Solar makes sense. Pennsylvania, as I alluded to, it's a little trickier, right? It's certainly where there's, if there's interest, I like to say where there's a will, there's a way, but there are considerations we want to think about. So that's a critical one. Explore your organization's internal appetite for a renewable energy project. Certainly, right, like these projects can be expensive. Certainly they have a return, but it's some capital investment up front. There's you have to get the CFO, the leadership team involved. So you want to understand internally how people think about this. And more importantly, you want to be able to craft a very strong business case as you think about presenting this to others in the organization. So if you're the champion, we can certainly, or an advisor can certainly help you craft that message. And then finally, consider using a consultant to sit on your side of the table. There are a lot of different ways that you can engage with an advisor, and there's oftentimes a fee. Sometimes it's done on a contingent basis. But if you do have somebody who knows the developers, knows the process, knows the product, then the value to have somebody on your side can be realized very quickly. And again, you've got a day job, and so having somebody to help you is actually it's a really powerful thing. So I would encourage you all to think about that. And I believe that's just about it. Hillary, I think that's the end of the formal part of the presentation here, and we've got about 9 more minutes or so to take questions.
Yes, thank you, Steve. So please feel free to send in your questions via the Q&A feature. We do have some that have already come in. Here's one, Steve, that you can answer. Sure. We have multiple facilities across states, but want to get into solar. How should we handle this? Can we take advantage of incentives in all of the states that we're in?
Yeah, great question. And that's actually a really nice position to be in. So the short answer is yes. What you'd want to do is prioritize and think about the different states or regions where your facilities are, and then prioritize those projects. And then a lot of it will come back down to, I referenced a lot of governance and internal decision making. So a lot of it will come down to how your organization works internally, right? So let's say you had a facility in New Jersey and one in Ohio. The economics in New Jersey are going to be much better. The one in Ohio might not make as much sense. So you could either prioritize and do one project, or you could actually take some of those savings from the New Jersey project, apply them to the Ohio project, and then both receive positive economic benefits. But it really will depend upon how you manage your facilities and how the finances are thought of internally. But absolutely, and for developers, bigger is better, right? We, or I should say they, love to see more scale. And because these projects can take a while to develop and the policy and regulation is always changing, you may find that today, while New Jersey is a great place to start, tomorrow Ohio will come along and there'll be improved legislation, economics, other beneficial rules for renewable energy. So absolutely.
Here's another one. Are there risks to signing up for community solar? What if you move during the contract term?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Typically on community solar, and it varies if you're have large meters, small meters, but the devil's in the details. And so what you or we could help you do is certainly look through a contract, understand what the termination provisions are. Some of the standard termination provisions are 90 days, but if it's a more specialized contract, the developer, the financier who you are entering into an agreement with will assume you're a sophisticated energy purchaser, and so the terms may be a little bit more onerous. I would say that going through a process and communicating what your needs are up front and running a process and looking at multiple bids from multiple developers and projects is a good thing to do. But yeah, there are certainly ways to, the good thing about community solar is that if you are to leave, that frees up capacity from a project which can be applied to a different project. It's very fungible in that sense. So absolutely. Good question. Thank you.
Another one for you. I'm in an electricity contract for 3 years, but we're looking at adding rooftop solar now because of incentives. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Again, devil's in the details, right? So we want to understand what the contract provisions are and what the penalties are for exiting early. Or sometimes, in the case of like community solar, you can procure community solar, which really won't impact it won't impact that contract. So again, it's we want to look through the contract, we want to understand, and even if there are penalties, you want to think about the magnitude too, because at the end of the day, as we as this bubbles up to the CFO's office, we're going to think about what the net benefit is. And if you have to pay a little to get out of a contract, you might make that up in terms of energy savings or controlling your budgets or whatever. So, I didn't give you a real definitive answer there, but it depends, which is often the answer in solar, and we can help you kind of decipher the individual requirements that you have internally. But very good question. Thank you.
How about this one? What happens if a solar company goes out of business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So generally, I think that if a solar company goes out of business, it really shouldn't impact you in any way, shape, or form. So let's look at two scenarios. Typically, people will either buy their system, so they'll actually own it, or they'll lease it through some third-party type of arrangement. If you buy the system, now provided the solar company stays in business as they build your array, which shouldn't be a problem. It can be a long process with things like interconnection or permitting, but the actual construction of a commercial solar array, really, depending on the size, only takes a couple weeks to a couple months at the longest. And so if they build this, they've satisfied their kind of construction obligations. You'll want to make sure that they are doing it right. They're using tier 1 equipment, and that the thing turns on. But once it turns on, solar just tends to work. Again, no moving parts, very little maintenance required. So if that company goes away, not really a big deal. The warranties are intact. The panels are warranted for 25 years, and so it should work just fine. In a third-party owned system, so let's say you're leasing it and somebody puts it on your roof or on your property, and you're paying them effectively on a per kilowatt hour basis. So let's say they go out of business, and solar, we sometimes call it the solar coaster. We've seen a lot of this happen, right? So a third-party entity owns your system and it goes away, it goes out of business. Well, worst case scenario, that's great for you because, or best case scenario, they go away, you have an operating asset on your land and it's producing energy. So you're no longer paying an entity for that power or energy that doesn't exist anymore. But that very infrequently happens because the asset that you are hosting on your property is really a cash flow for that company. So when that company goes out of business, your solar asset will be transferred to a different owner. So it's kind of like mortgages, right? They just view these as series of cash flows. So there's a strong, I guess it's important to mention too, there's a strong financial component to solar. While the technology, right, you need to be on it and you need to understand it. The financing really makes these projects work. And as I mentioned, the markets have become more mature, what we call tax equity. The markets, they understand it. And so a lot of these eventualities are taken care of just by virtue of the mature markets. But great question. Yeah.
We have time for one more.
Okay, good.
How do I know which incentives my company qualifies for?
Yeah, that great question. You can do some preliminary research. There's really a great resource called Desire. It's DSIRE. If you look that up, you'll find it, and it will go state by state. But that's kind of the secret sauce. As much as folks are trying to get these incentives out there and have people understand them, they can be very tricky and difficult. And on top of that, it's often not the incentive that makes or breaks a project. It can be things like interconnection, right? So you're tying your system into NYSEG's grid or NSTAR, whomever's grid it is. They have to allow for you to connect. So understanding those sort of regulations and process questions are critical. And in advisors, certainly we can help you, but also the developers should know that as well. So as you receive proposals, either solicited or unsolicited, you should ask these questions. And really a shameless plug for using us or another advisor is really just that, right? Like you want somebody to look out for your interests, to sit on your side of the table. And while you can get a lot of information from 2, 3, 5, 10 vendors, oftentimes it's better to have all that information being filtered through one source. And that one source then can understand not only the technical qualifications of a vendor, their understanding of regulatory and policy and incentives, but can also get a feel for their financial strength, the equipment they use, and how a project becomes bankable. That is to say, how a financing entity would choose to accept that project. And so I think there's more value to that than I think most people realize. And so I would certainly encourage you to talk to as many folks as you can. But great question. Very good question.
Thank you, Steve. We
Yeah.
did just get one more if you're up to answering.
Yeah, please.
Paul, why should I use USource rather than hire a solar company directly? I have a 100,000 square foot roof that could hold the solar panels. We've recently switched from an owner occupied business to being a real estate company with third-party tenants.
Right, great question. And it's kind of like what I just outlined. Certainly there are credible developers out there. I would encourage you to talk to them, ask them questions. They may have a perfectly good solution for you. What I've seen in my experience as a developer and participating in RFP processes through a consultant or a sort of a clearinghouse of information is that different people have different perspectives and opinions and use different equipment and have different costs, et cetera. So at the very least, by going through a consultant, who, by the way, developers typically don't like us consultants because we ask the hard questions. and we know all the tricks, right? Like I can tell you, having been a developer, how to kind of juice the cash flows in the out years or the near years or production. And so one thing a consultant can do is normalize and standardize so that you get a true apples to apples. But again, I don't want to discount the value of a good developer. And in fact, much of what I learn on a daily basis is by talking to the practitioners in the field, and learning what they have to say. But I do think very sincerely, at the end of the day, having somebody who represents your interests, who can, like in your interest, right? There's going to, in your case, for example, so it's gone from owner occupied to being tenants. So now there's sub-metering. How do you think about where that energy goes? And will the tenants pay for it directly? And what's their credit rating? And do they have appropriate finances for a third party to come in? Right, there's all sorts of considerations, and there are ways to think through that and around that. And ultimately, we need to know what it is that you're trying to do. How do you qualify and quantify the risk? And then how do you select a vendor? So, that's the question that you asked is great, but that's a really in-depth, complex question. And, happy to talk you through that or about it with you. I love doing that. So that's great. Yeah, good question.
Well, thank you, Steve. We did go a little bit over, but I think it's really great to have some of that, those questions answered. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be presenting a brief survey at the end of the webinar. We'd really appreciate it if you could answer just a few of our questions so that we could continuously improve. Steve's contact information is on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to him with any questions, or if you think of anything, you can feel free to reach out. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. It was fun. Appreciate it.